Salvete discipuli! This is Magister Muth, and we'll be continuing on with our letter describing the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Pliny the Elder has just arrived at his friend Pomponianus's house, brought in by a favorable wind that was pinning the other ships down, and he's started to very nonchalantly bathe and dine, and in this way try to assuage everyone else's fears. So we'll jump right in with our color coding scheme at the top right and discuss how what Pliny does next. Interim. Meanwhile, we still use that in English, in the interim. And our first verb is going to be re lucebant, from lux, our word for light. Something was shining back. And what was shining back? Flammae and incendia, flames and fires. Flames that were latissimae, the widest flames, or perhaps most widespread flames, and alta incendia, tall fires or conflagrations, where in pluribus locis, in a very many places, the comparative of multus, e Vesuvio monte, from Mount Vesuvius. So what does that mean that they're shining back? Looking across at the mountain, you can see the fires gleaming in the distance all over the place. And still talking about these fires, we have our relative pronoun quorum, whose. So we're talking about the fires whose fulgor et claritas, basically shining or brightness and clarity, those two things, excitabatur, uh, were excited or were increased. Excito can be to wake something up, to excite it, or to lift up its intensity. So the brightness and clarity of the fires was increased. How? By tenebris, by shadows, namely the shadows, genitive, of the night. Meaning that since it's dark out, the fires burn all the more brightly and they can be seen clearly with much claritas. So, Ile, that guy, once again, we're talking about Pliny the Elder, the subject of our letter, usually the unspoken subject if there's nothing else relevant in the sentence. That guy, dictitava. Let's jump all the way down to our verb, the only main verb in this sentence. Well, dico dicere is to say. This ito suffix is something we call a frequentative suffix, which means that it's a repeated or ongoing action. So he basically kept on telling. And he's going to keep on telling people that something is true. So we're going to have some indirect statements, which we should remember have an accusative subject and an infinitive verb. So skimming quickly, I see ardere is one infinitive, but actually with this que, we probably want another verb. And I think we're looking for relictos with an implied esse, being a perfect passive infinitive. So he kept on telling them that ignes relictos esse, that fires had been left behind. And why were they left behind? Well, we have an ablative, perhaps expressing cause, by the trepidatio, by the fear, trepidation of the agrestes, the people who work in the agri of the farmers. So the farmers were scared and they left their left fires behind. And second explanation, that desertas villas, deserted or empty houses, were burning through solitudinem, through their loneliness. The idea here being that, oh, these fires, there must be a logical explanation why there's a crazy amount of fires all over that mountain where lots of people live and farm. Everyone was so scared by all these earthquakes and clouds that they just left their stoves on and started a bunch of forest fires and house fires. And he was saying this in remedium, into or perhaps towards the remedy of their formido, of their fear. So really almost a purpose idea in that prepositional phrase, to remedy their fear. Now, whether or not he's trying to come up with non-supernatural logical explanations with a dearth of knowledge about how volcanoes work, or if he's trying to come up with something that's a little more mundane and soothing, even though he suspects something much worse, you can make up your own mind. Tum, then, what does our uncle do next? He dade it. He gave himself quietis, gave himself to rest. A bit of an idiom we still have in English, to give yourself over to something. So he started to rest or nap, and he quievit, that's the verbal form of quies, he rested. How? Indeed, quidem with a verissimo somno, with a truest sleep. So he actually went to sleep, which perhaps is emphasized because if we put ourselves in their position, it's probably pretty hard to sleep in the midst of such a cataclysmic natural disaster. And Pliny the Younger, the writer, explains how we know he was actually asleep, not just acting it out. Nam for another logical connector for the meatus, the going or movement of his anima, of his breath, genitive, the movement of his breath, qui. Now this is masculine, so we're going to have to refer to our fourth declension verbal noun, our movement, or the coming and going. So which, erat, that's going to be our verb. So his breathing basically was gravior et sonantior, heavier and more resounding, or louder. And why was it louder? Propter amplitudinem corporis, on account of the size of his body. So he might be a little out of shape and was prone to heavy breathing. And we're missing here just the word illi. That's a dative there of our pronoun declension for him or for that guy. Perhaps we could take it as a possessive or a reference for who this is referring to. So he's an older man. He's not exactly a physically fit guy. He's really a scholar, spends all his time studying, and so he's not in the best of shape. So his breathing can be heard from the hallway. What are we talking about here? He's snoring heavily. So if you walk by his door, you would understand that, wow, he actually is asleep due to the snoring. And one more relative clause. Actually, this was known. Audiebatur. Finally, we get our main verb that goes with meatus. So the movement of his breath, which was rather loud, audiebatur. It was heard ab eis, by those people. Which ones? Now we have a relative clause explaining. By the people qui obversabantur, who were turned about, basically who were going about their day or were passing by, at the limini, at the threshold. And here limen in the dative again as an object of our compound verb, obversabatur. So people who were turning about at the threshold or perhaps passing by the doorway. So people outside can hear him snoring. He is really asleep. Wow. However, life continues to go on for the other folks in the house. So said, but the area. An area is an open courtyard in a house. You might imagine a nice square surrounded by a lovely shaded colonnade. And whoa, it looks like the area of a square. That's where that comes from. So the courtyard, ex qua, from which the diaita, that's referring to his little room, or the apartment he's staying in. So the courtyard from which the room adibatur, that is a passive from eo ire plus ad, to go to, so or to approach. So from which his room was approached, basically the courtyard outside. That courtyard surrexerat, it had risen, ita so opleta, sorry, that's a nominative participle describing the area. So full, full, think completa, complete or filled up. So full now with cinere, with ash, and with mixtis pumicibus, with mixed or various pumice stones. And since it was so filled up, that cues us up perfectly for a result clause. It's so full that if some condition, then exitus, literally a going out or exit, negaretur, passive imperfect subjunctive there, was denied. Perhaps we want to say a would be denied, just showing it's in the condition, it's a general hypothetical condition. So leaving would be denied if, under what circumstance, and here we're going to have to put in some form of sum, probably sit or maybe esset, because I think we have imperfect subjunctives here. If there should be a longior mora, a longer delay in the bedroom. So what does that mean? Exit would be denied if there was a longer delay in the bedroom. The ash is starting to pile up so much that the doorway itself would be blocked. Now, imagine your nice doorway. If the ash level's up here, he needs to get out, otherwise he'll be trapped. Therefore, excitatus, we're still talking about our avunculus, Pliny the Elder, having been woken up, he procated. He proceeded or went out. Actually, present tense here, he proceeds. It would be processit if it was perfect. He goes out, and another que here, connecting our clauses, and he redit se. He gives himself back, or returns himself, to our datives, Pomponianus, et Ceteris, and the rest of them. Rest of which people? The ones qui pervigelerant, who, pluperfect indicative here, had kept a vigil, who were vigilant, namely who stayed up all night watching. So he joins the other folks who, for some strange reason, weren't able to sleep in this situation. And next, consultant. They consult in commune, in common, we could say, in towards the common situation. Basically, they're communally discussing. I believe commune here would technically be an accusative because of our adverbial declension. It would have to be communi with the I stem ending if it was an ablative. But either way, we could take that as an idiomatic phrase. So they consult present tense in common, and now we're going to consult about what? There's an indirect question with two options in the subjunctive. They're consulting whether subsistant, present subjunctive, from third conjugation sisto, to stand, whether they should stay, basically, stay intratecta, under, within the roofs, stay in the house, on, that's going to be our or here, or whether they should vagantur, another present subjunctive, whether they should wander like a vagabond in aperto, in the open. So a classic, should I stay or should I go? The clash conundrum. And as they're consulting this, well, they have a lot of things to consider. Nam, for, logical connector, for tecta nutabant. The roofs, literally the coverings, the things covered from tego tegere, to cover, protect comes from this root too. The roofs nutabant were shaking, were nodding up and down. Why were they nodding up and down? With crebris and vastis, crowded or frequent, and vast tremors. So lots of earthquakes are making the house look pretty shaky at this point. Pun intended. And our next main verb is videbantur. And we might remember that the passive of to see is often best translated as to seem. And they seemed, And here we're still going to have the tecta be the subject here. They seemed to do what? To abire out referre, first and second complementary infinitives. So ab plus ao ire, to go away, and re plus ferro in the passive, to be brought back. Basically to go this way and that, to move back and forth. And we have some adverbs to help us. Nunc huc, now here. Nunc illuk, now there. Both of those being the directional motion towards. You could even say hither and thither, this way and that. And they appear to move that way quasi, as if. We still use quasi in English to say something is kind of pseudo, as if it's something, but not entirely true. As if these tecta are a mota, having been moved away from, that a prefix, from suis sedibus, from their seats or their foundations. So if I was in a building like that, shaking that much, it seems like it's moving off its very foundation, that might be a pretty scary place to be. What if the whole thing collapses? All right, so let's see what they decide. And we start with our quam. Although sub dio, this is literally under the dio, under the divine, as in outside, under heaven. Although under heaven, rursus, again, metuebatur, something was being feared. And what was being feared? Our verbal noun, casus, the falling. Often this means a metaphorical downfall, like a misfortune. Here I think it's very literal from Cato Cadere, the falling of pumicum, of pumice stones. Pumice stones that are levis, that are light, and exesus, literally eaten away from. And if you've ever seen a pumice stone, you kind of have a rock with all those little sponge-like holes that make it look as if it's been eaten away by something. So the falling of those light and eaten away pumice stones, although that was being feared, tamen, nevertheless, nice concessive clause showing the contrast there. Nevertheless, collatio, that is also from con plus thero. Collatus. Collatus is brought together. So the bringing together or the collection of the dangers, a legit, chose, quod, which thing I just talked about. Another connective relative, probably a lot easier to say this instead of which. This, choice, I guess. So what does that mean? It's taking a step back. Although the falling of rocks was feared, nevertheless, the collection of the dangers chose that option, namely going outside. Sub dio. So they are going to go in the should or stay or should I go. And Pliny the Younger now is going to comment a little bit more on their reasoning with a nice parallel structure, which we're going to have to use our verb vicit to overcome twice. So in the first half, we have apud illum versus apud alios. Apud basically means with or among a certain group. So with that guy, namely Pliny the Elder, something happened, while apud alios, among the others, something else happened. And the quidem is just a nice indeed adverb. So with that guy, with the uncle, ratio, rationem vicit. One reason, one rational idea conquered another rational idea. Among the rest of them, timor, timorem vicit. One fear conquered another fear. The idea here being that Pliny decided that they should leave because one logical reason overcame the other. while the rest of them were just scared of both options, but they were scared of one less than the other. So once again, characterizing Pliny as rational and thoughtful, while the rest of them are irrational and fearful. And you know I can't go by without acknowledging a lovely word order here, a nice chiastic structure, showing especially with the context, the parallelism, the ellipsis. Mwah, chef's kiss. Beautiful Latin sentence. Thank you for your style, Pliny. All right. So, since they decide to go, they need to properly fortify themselves. Therefore, they constringunt. They tie together. And what are they tying? Cervicalia, things that are put for your cervix, your neck, basically neck pillows. I think most pillows are kind of for your neck. Pillows which are impulsita, placed on something, nice compound verb with a dative, placed on their heads. And those are tied there with our ablative linteis, with linen cloth. So yes, they literally made pillow helmets to survive a volcano. Pretty cool. And id, that thing, it fuit, it was a munimentum, was a protection. We see from munio to fortify, and it was a protection adversus, facing or turned towards, which can act like a preposition here, against incidentia, from in plus cado, to fall on, present participle, falling things in the neuter plural. So that was a protection against falling stuff. Well, we'll leave our group with their pillow armor, and next time wrap up a letter. Valete omnes.